My older brother humiliated me at my graduation, calling me the family failure, while he bragged about his millions. I stayed silent until the tax auditors arrived at our dinner, thanks to the anonymous tip and the ledger I found in his childhood bedroom. The restaurant lights glowed warmly, but the air inside felt sharp, almost cutting. I had barely taken my seat when my brother's voice rose above the chatter, loud enough for every relative to hear. He leaned back in his chair, smirking, and announced, "Well, here's our family failure finally graduating. Took long enough." The laughter that followed wasn't joyful. It was nervous, awkward, the kind that fills silence when people don't know how to react. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to stay still, my hands folded neatly on the table. My parents tried to hush him, whispering that this was supposed to be my night, but he brushed them off with a wave, launching into a monologue about his empire. He spoke of his luxury cars, his penthouse, the deals he had closed just last week. Every sentence was a dagger, not because of the wealth itself but because of the way he flaunted it, like proof that I would never measure up. I caught my aunt's eyes. She looked down quickly, embarrassed. My cousin shifted uncomfortably, pretending to check his phone. The waiter brought appetizers, but I barely tasted mine. My brother raised his glass, boasting about how he had made it, while others wasted time chasing degrees. He winked at me as if the entire dinner was a stage built for his performance. I stayed quiet, studying him, memorizing every detail. The way he laughed too loudly, the way he demanded attention, the way he thrived on humiliation. At one point he pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos of his vacations. "This is what success looks like," he said, passing it around the table. I watched relatives nod politely, though their smiles were thin. My mother tried to change the subject, asking me about my plans after graduation, but my brother interrupted, mocking, "Plans? He'll probably end up teaching in some small town, while I'm closing million-dollar deals." I wanted to speak, but I held back. My silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. I let him dig deeper, let him build his tower of arrogance higher, knowing towers like that collapse hardest. I sipped my water slowly, my mind racing but my face calm. Then came dessert. Plates of cake and fruit were set down, and just as forks touched the table, the doors opened. 2 men in suits walked in carrying folders. Their presence shifted the room instantly. Conversations stopped. My brother's smile faltered. The men introduced themselves as auditors, asking if they could have a word with him. The room froze. My relatives exchanged glances, unsure of what was happening. My brother laughed nervously, trying to brush it off, but the men were firm. They had questions about his accounts, his businesses, his taxes. My brother's voice cracked as he insisted there must be some mistake. I sat back watching. The humiliation he had poured onto me minutes earlier now dripped onto him, heavier, sharper. The proud moment he had stolen from me was returning, reshaped, and I didn't need to say a word. The shadows of the night had shifted, and for the first time they weren't mine to carry. The silence after the auditor's arrival still echoed in my mind, but my thoughts drifted back to the moment that had set everything in motion. Weeks before graduation, I had been cleaning out our childhood home, a place filled with dusty corners and forgotten memories. My brother's old bedroom hadn't changed much, posters peeling from the walls, a broken lamp on the desk, and drawers stuffed with scraps of paper. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but when I pulled open the bottom drawer, I found a thick leather-bound ledger. Its cover was worn, the edges frayed, as if it had been hidden away for years. I sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through the pages. At first it looked like ordinary business notes. Numbers, dates, transactions. But the deeper I read, the more I realized something was wrong. Figures didn't match, amounts were crossed out, and entire sections seemed deliberately altered. My brother's handwriting was unmistakable, sharp and hurried, the same way he used to scribble answers during exams. I felt a chill run through me. This wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping. It was deception. Holding that ledger brought back memories of our childhood rivalry. He always had to win. I remembered board games where he would sneak extra moves, sports matches where he bent the rules, even family debates where he twisted words until everyone gave up. Winning wasn't just a goal for him, it was survival. And now, staring at the ledger, I realized that same hunger had followed him into adulthood. He hadn't changed, he had simply found bigger games to play. One memory stood out. A summer afternoon when we were children. We had set up a lemonade stand outside the house. I was excited, eager to sell cups to neighbors. But my brother insisted on handling the money. By the end of the day he claimed we had made a profit, yet I noticed coins missing from the jar. When I asked, he laughed, saying he deserved more because he worked harder. That small betrayal had stung, but I let it go. Now, decades later, the ledger felt like the grown-up version of that same trick. I knew I couldn't confront him directly. He was too powerful, too confident, and I was just the younger sibling he loved to belittle. But the ledger gave me something I had never had before: leverage. I spent nights studying it, tracing patterns, piecing together the inconsistencies. Each page revealed more of his greed, more of his lies. My anger grew, but so did my resolve. The decision to send an anonymous tip wasn't easy. I sat at my desk, the ledger open beside me, my hands trembling over the keyboard. What if they traced it back to me? What if he found out? The fear was real, but so was the memory of his voice calling me a failure. That word echoed louder than my doubts. I typed carefully, attaching scanned pages, and sent the message to the tax authorities. Then I closed my laptop, my heart pounding, knowing there was no turning back. Carrying that secret was heavier than I expected. Every day I walked around with the knowledge of what was coming. I couldn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my friends. I smiled when people congratulated me on graduation, but inside I was replaying his insults, using them as fuel. At night, I lay awake, imagining the moment when his arrogance would finally collapse. There were times I almost broke. One evening, my mother asked me to help her sort old photographs. She pulled out a picture of my brother holding a trophy, grinning proudly. "He's always been so determined," she said softly. I nodded, hiding the storm inside me. She didn't know the truth, and I couldn't bear to shatter her image of him, not yet. The plan took shape slowly, deliberately. I didn't want the auditors to arrive just any day. It had to be the night of my graduation dinner, the night he would be at his most boastful, surrounded by family, basking in attention. I timed it carefully, making sure the authorities had enough evidence, enough reason to act. Every step was calculated, every detail considered. In the days leading up to the dinner, I carried myself as if nothing was unusual. I laughed at jokes, answered questions about my future, and pretended to be the same quiet sibling everyone expected. But inside I was counting down. Each hour brought me closer to the moment when the balance would shift. I remember standing in front of the mirror the morning of graduation, adjusting my gown. My reflection stared back, calm but determined. For years I had been the shadow to his spotlight, the quiet one in the background. But now I held the secret that could change everything. The ledger wasn't just paper and ink. It was justice waiting to unfold. By the time the dinner began, I was ready. I let him mock, let him brag, let him build his tower of pride higher and higher. Because I knew, tucked away in the hands of the auditors, the ledger was waiting. And when they walked through those doors, the game he had played for so long would finally turn against him. The air inside the restaurant had shifted. What had begun as a stage for my brother's arrogance was now a courtroom without walls. The auditors laid out their folders on the table, their voices calm but firm as they asked about hidden accounts, unexplained transfers, and discrepancies in his businesses. My brother, who had moments earlier been laughing at my expense, suddenly looked smaller. His shoulders stiffened, his smile vanished, and his eyes darted around the room, searching for support that wasn't there. He tried to laugh it off at first. "Gentlemen, surely you've made a mistake," he said, his tone forced, his confidence cracking. But the auditors didn't flinch. They slid papers across the table, pointing to numbers, dates, and signatures. His voice faltered as he stammered through explanations that sounded less convincing with every word. The man who had once commanded every room now struggled to hold his ground. Around us the family sat frozen. My aunt's fork hovered in midair, my cousin's phone slipped from his hand, and my mother pressed her napkin tightly against her lips. My father leaned back, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the documents. The silence was heavy, broken only by my brother's stumbling words. I watched him unravel. His arrogance, once so loud, dissolved into nervous chuckles and shaky denials. He tried to charm the auditors, offering them drinks, insisting they sit down and enjoy dessert first. But they remained professional, their questions cutting through his attempts at distraction. Each answer he gave only led to another contradiction, another hole in his story. The relatives who had admired him began to shift their gaze. I felt their eyes on me, not with pity this time but with something different: recognition. They saw me sitting quietly, calm, unshaken, while the man who had called me a failure crumbled. My silence spoke louder than his boasts ever had. My brother's frustration grew. He slammed his hand on the table, demanding to know who had set this up. His voice rose, but it carried no authority anymore. The auditors didn't react. They simply continued, methodical and precise. His anger only made him look more desperate. I sat back, my heart steady. I didn't gloat, didn't smile, didn't speak. I let the moment unfold, knowing that revenge didn't need words. It needed patience. It needed truth. And truth was standing right there in black and white, laid out on the table for everyone to see. The tension spread through the room. My cousin whispered to his mother, "Is this real?" My aunt shook her head, unable to answer. My father finally spoke, his voice low but firm, "You need to cooperate." It was the first time I had heard him speak to my brother without pride, without admiration. My brother's confidence collapsed completely. He leaned back in his chair, his face pale, his hands trembling. The man who had once mocked me for being quiet now had nothing left to say. His empire, his success, his pride, all of it was unraveling in front of the very people he had tried to impress. I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not joy, not triumph, but a deep, steady calm. For years, I had carried the weight of his insults, his arrogance, his need to overshadow me. And now, without raising my voice, without lifting a finger in that moment, I watched the balance shift. The lesson hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Success built on lies cannot last. Pride without honesty collapses under its own weight. And sometimes the most powerful revenge is silence, the kind that lets truth do the speaking. The dinner ended not with laughter or celebration, but with whispers and uneasy glances. My brother left with the auditors, his head lowered, his steps heavy. The family remained behind, stunned, their admiration shattered. And for the first time they looked at me not as the failure, but as someone who had endured, someone who had waited, someone who had let patience carve justice. I rose from my chair, steady and calm, and walked out into the night. The shadows that had once followed me no longer felt heavy. They had shifted and they no longer belonged to me.